one of the good fortunes that I have working at the Kennedy Center is to be able to try to keep myself aware of things that are going on locally that have an international interest to our programs and our students and faculty. And probably a little bit more than a year ago, I had the opportunity to meet Laura Dupuy. And I had heard previously of the Utah Council of Citizen Diplomacy, but hadn't had the opportunity in my job to be involved with them. Laura became executive director of the UCCD, which was formerly known as the Utah Visitors Center, in 2000. As I understand it, she previously had been working in accounting for KPMG and was asked to help on an accounting issue involving the International Visitor Center. She volunteered her time and realized that working in this area of citizen diplomacy was a much better fit for her personally, and made the jump over. The UCCD, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is one of a 96-member council of communities throughout the United States that helps support the U.S. Department of State's exchange initiatives. Delegates, and Laura will explain this more, but delegates come to the United States for a 4-week program in Washington, D.C., and then they visit 3 U.S. communities, which are determined by State Department diplomats as a good meet for the program objective. In 2005, UCCD hosted 334 delegates with the help of community volunteers, local professional resources, delegates' professional counterparts, and ordinary citizens. So they're very active across the state of Utah and very involved with all kinds of organizations and virtually all things that are international here in Utah. Ms. Dupuy was born in Louisiana. Her family later moved to Texas and Florida. She claimed that the defining moment in her life was when one day when she said, when she was 16, her father had a lifetime career with a chemical company, came home one day and said, "What would you think about moving to South Korea?" So her family moved to Seoul between her junior and senior year, where she graduated from the Seoul Foreign School. An accomplished musician, she taught music for 10 years and played the fiddle in bluegrass and Celtic bands. She received a BA in International Studies from Western College in Oxford, Ohio, and an accounting degree from Idaho State University and an MBA from Westminster College. She and her husband, Trip Hopkins, a respiratory specialty manager for Merck, live with their 2 chocolate Labrador retrievers and a cat in the beautiful Salt Lake City avenues. And I'm sure Laura will say this, but again, if you don't know anything about UCCD, you can find them online at utahdiplomacy.org. We're just very pleased and ask you to join me in welcoming Ms. Laura Dupuy.
Thank you, Corey, for that very warm and wonderful welcome. It's such an honor to be here today. I have the good fortune of receiving your weekly emails and updates, and there is an extraordinary degree of talented diplomats, high-level officials who come to you through this program, and I'm honored to be standing where many of them stand. It's really a pleasure. In addition, I couldn't have picked a more lovely day to come to BYU. The gardens are beautiful. It is such a wonderful place to be. It might be an incentive not to graduate on time, just so that you get the chance to spend more time here. But it really is a pleasure. I'd like to introduce very quickly a colleague who is accompanying me today, a young woman who is interning with our organization this year, Saida Mamadova. She is a Muskie Fellow and is completing an international degree in finance at the University of Utah. We talked about the football rivalry, but she assured me that her studies keep her from paying any attention to sports at all. But I have one of the best jobs in the world. My job is citizen diplomacy, but citizen diplomacy is every one of us' job. It's something that we do unknowingly and unwittingly every time we travel abroad, every time we accept a missionary assignment, every time we welcome a stranger to our city and offer directions to someone on the street. We represent who we are as American people, sharing the values and the common goals that we have as a nation, and it's a great honor. I'd like to read an email that I received not long ago from a new friend in Iraq. And he traveled to the United States under this program that I'm going to describe in more detail 2 years ago. He is an English teacher in Baghdad. He teaches a school of young boys, and he teaches them English. And he sent me this follow-up email. Hi, my dearest friend Laura. Your real feelings towards the Iraqi people let me feel that there would be secure and progressive life soon. Your emails from time to time lessen and eradicate our sadness because of the daily strife in Iraq. Your wonderful thoughts and sincere feelings will create good hope for the future. Please keep contact. I'm very anxious to hear from you every day. Best regards, your faithful friend, Hadi. 2 years ago, Hadi had never heard of Utah or Salt Lake City, and I certainly had never had the great privilege and honor of meeting with someone who was living in the heart of Baghdad, who had the challenges that they are facing on a daily basis. But Hadi was nominated to come to the United States as a delegate of the International Visitor Leadership Program. This is a distinguished program that's been in existence since the early 60s. And I'll share with you some of the history of this program. But Hadi came as a delegation of 8 fellow Iraqi teachers, and they traveled to Washington, D.C., where they met with representatives from the Department of State. They had a very comprehensive and thorough tour of Washington, D.C., and then traveled across the country to see what America is like in the Midwest, what it's like in the mountain states, what it's like in the South, and what it's like in the West. People have heard of New York and Chicago and Los Angeles, but very few people have seen what the heartland of America is really like. And that's where our council, our volunteers, our professional resources, and our home hospitality hosts have the opportunity to extend the hand of friendship around the world. A lot of people ask me, what is citizen diplomacy? It's kind of a nebulous concept, but it's based on the concept that we as individuals have the right, we even have the responsibility to help shape U.S. foreign relations, one handshake at a time. We realize with billions of people in the world that exchanges that include only 4,000 people a year may seem like a drop in the bucket. But every contact that we make has an incredible multiplier effect, that the contacts that we make, the experiences that our visitors have in the United States are shared many times over when they return to their country. Traditionally defined, citizen diplomats are unofficial ambassadors who either participate in exchange programs or who host and interact with international exchange participants. To the extent that some of these exchange programs are funded by the U.S. government, citizen diplomacy is a fundamental part of U.S. public diplomacy. Most people around the world can distinguish between the policies of a government and the people of a country. But whatever administration is in power, it's truly the long-term best interest of the United States to maximize exposure that foreigners have and get to see American life firsthand. I've been doing some research in public diplomacy. There are actually 3 kind of key words, and if you're interested in this topic, I encourage you to put a Google alert on your computer for any articles published worldwide that relate to citizen diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, and public diplomacy. When I started in this job 6 years ago, there was nothing. A Google search would reveal nothing about public diplomacy or citizen diplomacy. Today, I get at least 3 to 4 to 5 Google alerts about articles that are being written about this very, very important issue. The United States has had many public diplomacy programs over the last century, some of them that you may be aware of, that you've heard, Voice of America, Radio Free Europe. But the first formal public diplomacy activities began in 1917. This was following George Washington's admonition on his farewell address when he said that American foreign policy should not involve engaging in entangling alliances. The United States was a small, weak country. They were concerned with geographic expansion at the time. They were concerned with issues of slavery, and there simply wasn't the time or the resources to engage with the rest of the world. All of that has changed. In 1917, Woodrow Wilson established a committee on public information, which was called the Krill Commission. And this first effort at public diplomacy engaged Europe and it was designed specifically to help explain why the United States decided to engage and enter into World War I. After the war ended, it was followed and replaced by a new organization called the Foreign Policy Association. This esteemed organization is still in existence today, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But the whole purpose of the Foreign Policy Association was to help engage interested citizens in causes that related to the World War I, the proposed peace accords, and questioning the desirability, the pros and cons of Wilson's proposed League of Nations. The Council on Foreign Relations appeared shortly thereafter, and it was motivated by a similar interest in kind of feeling out what is this League of Nations initiative. The Council became a leading player in giving American public, that is, general citizens in communities large and small around the country, a greater understanding of foreign affairs and what their importance is to the United States. Around the same time, there were a lot of private exchange programs that were being created, focusing on international exchanges, and also bringing professionals from other countries to the United States to meet with their professional counterparts. But despite the active involvement of the public in the 20s and 30s, the U.S. government still did not have an active or formal public diplomacy program. In 1938, in response to rising Nazi propaganda in Central and South America, the Department of State reacted by establishing a Division of Cultural Relations. As part of this effort, the Department of State sought out local groups, community-minded citizens who would be willing to host delegates in their home city if the Department of State footed the bill for the plane ticket. And there were a lot of people who said yes. One of the things that I always say about this program is that I missed my window of opportunity to join the Foreign Service, and I'm getting a little old to run off to join the Foreign Service now. But I can be part of this program and these exchanges and be an ambassador by welcoming people into our community. And there are a lot of people who share the same feeling that I do. In fact, many of you in this room probably do. And in the 1930s, there were a lot of people around the country. Our media, our access to news and public opinion was much more limited than it is today. And people readily welcomed people into their homes so that they could learn and so that they could share. But during World War II, the U.S. also administered other media campaigns which were designed to promote the Allies' war aims. You might remember from movies how airplanes dropped messages upon cities throughout Europe. And this was truly a public diplomacy effort to get messages to people who didn't have access. The Voice of America helped to provide information to resistance fighters, and it helped to maintain the morale of citizens who were in areas that were besieged by war. But at the war end, the U.S. faced new challenges. And they knew that they must help to rebuild the countries that had been devastated by the war. And knowing that they would never govern Japan or Germany indefinitely, they needed to come up with the means to help share with future leaders of both countries what democratic values were. One of the major influential programs that they developed was a series of networks of cultural centers that were located throughout Europe. People could go in and use a lending library, sit down and watch videos or movies about key American issues. But the real defining event that happened was in 1946, and this was the passage of the Fulbright Act. And just about everyone has heard of the Fulbright Scholarship Program. And many of you, I hope, will be participants in that. This act established a mix of different kinds of educational and cultural exchange programs, as well as a visitor program. Visitor program, aha, now that's where our organization really starts to find its direction. But the visitor program was designed to introduce visitors to the principles of American democracy and to acquaint them with the American institutions and people on a one-to-one basis. One of the most notable alumni of the early program was Willy Brandt, who visited in '54, and he later became Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany. The program was expanded throughout the years to help get more programs, more individuals involved. And in the 50s, more and more of our communities around the country began to participate in a community level on these particular public diplomacy programs. The programs focused primarily on professional appointments, but each visitor was invited to the home of an ordinary American citizen to see what does an American house look like, because they'd been traveling and seeing the insides of hotels, but there's always the greatest insights into a culture is to go into a home. And we had visitors who would visit a hog farm in Indiana, who would visit a musician's home in Nashville, who would visit a professor's home at the University of Chicago. Every spectrum, every walk of life is represented by our community volunteers. I remember visiting with one woman who must be in her 90s, and she never fails to go to our national meeting in Washington. And she said her very first visitor was from Sweden. And she was very embarrassed because they didn't have indoor plumbing. They had an outhouse. And she said, what in the world am I doing welcoming this distinguished delegate? And it turns out that the man was absolutely enamored. He said, I had no idea that this was the true America. And to this day, they have maintained a 40-plus year friendship. And it was one of those remarkable events that changed this woman's life and led her to recruit hundreds in her own community to remind them, this is not a state dinner. This is not a formal event that you must fret over. It can be as simple as a barbecue or a neighborhood party. But today, the program is called the International Visitor Leadership Program, and it is administered by the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. This is how it works. Every country that we have an embassy in will have staff personnel whose job it is to identify key leaders from the public sector to invite to the United States as guests for this program. The delegates will come from many, many areas. They will include managers from the NGO section. They will include teachers, educators, textbook writers. They will include lawyers and judges. They will include journalists. They will include religious leaders. So it comes from all spectrums. Very rarely does it come from the private sector. Our initiative is not to create trade relationships. These may occur, and we hope that they do as a result of the programs, but it is not our primary goal. We have a very impressive record, the Department of State and our embassies, in selecting key individuals. There are currently 33 presidents and heads of state around the world who have come to the United States on this program. That's pretty extraordinary. People like Tony Blair, Hamid Karzai, Margaret Thatcher, Indira Gandhi have all come, and the numbers grow. It's pretty exciting when we meet these energized, excited, idealistic young people who are coming and realize, oh, this may be the director of finance or economic development for this country, or we don't know where they might end up, but we know they're extraordinary young people. I used to think that I was a contemporary, but yet they seem to be getting younger and younger, or I just get older and older. But more and more, it seems that they're in their 30s. And so they really are just at the beginning of their rise in their career in their particular field. In a 1970 brochure, the program was described like this, and I like this. For most visitors, the path towards understanding of America led through the living room and dining rooms of community volunteers who helped the visitor form a more accurate image of the life of more or less average Americans. Understanding, tolerance, and respect. That's what it's all about. That's what we're trying to accomplish. And we do this one handshake at a time. But these words are very important as we look at the context of our world today. We read daily about the rising anti-American sentiments around the world. There was a recent 16-nation Pew Global Attitude Survey, and through this we learned that anti-Americanism in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia shows very modest signs of abating, but that the U.S. remains broadly disliked in many countries surveyed. Attitudes towards the U.S. remain quite negative throughout much of the world. And in fact, a survey showed that even 26% of the American people think that the country, that only 26 think the country is well liked around the world. This is a very disturbing trend, and we have found that this experience, this kind of an exchange, is the most vital part. As one ambassador said, it's not the miles that our visitor travels, but it's the last 3 feet that makes the difference between creating understanding. One of the most striking and concerning statements I ever heard came from an imam from Indonesia. He said, "America's not at all like I thought it was. In fact, if you want me to be completely honest, in Indonesia where I live, we don't believe Americans have morals." And I thought that was an extremely striking statement, and I said, why? He said, well, all I know about American culture is what I see from watching Baywatch. And I thought, oh my goodness, well that is an example of exporting not the best of the West, shall we say. But these are the kinds of perceptions that we hear changed over and over again, that the United States is not at all like we thought, that Americans have moral values, that they have strong feelings and sense of family, that Americans are very kind and generous people. They may not be as knowledgeable about world events as perhaps others around the world, but that can change too. And this is truly a two-way exchange. Not only do our visitors learn about America, but as importantly, each one of our community members who welcomes a guest into their home learns about our visitor, their country, their customs. They get to learn firsthand about Ukraine, about Kazakhstan, about Chile, about Botswana. And they would never have had that opportunity before. President Bush, as you know, he has recognized that public diplomacy is a tremendous need for us as a nation, and he has appointed his longtime aide and supporter, Karen Hughes, to the position of Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy. And this appointment really underscores the current administration's comprehension of the need for immediate and positive action. This is a challenging job, and I don't know if you've read any of the reports with some of her visits that she has made, but she really has her work cut out for her, and I applaud her for the fine work that she is doing. One of the things that is happening right now is that Congress is taking a very close look at international exchanges, and Congress is voting on an increase, and we expect to see an increase in the budget for international for educational and public exchanges by almost 20%, and so that bodes very well for all of the programs that we work with. But Abba Eban, Israel's ambassador to the UN, wrote in his book, Diplomacy for the Next Century, a quote that I really like. He said that after World War I, it dawned on humanity that if war is everybody's tragedy, then peace must be everybody's business. And as we say sometimes in the light of this new consciousness, it's no longer feasible to leave the business of diplomacy up to the experts, but that we as individuals have the right, the responsibility to do what we can. That's why, since 1967, members of our community have worked together. That's the year that they formed what was then called the International Visitors Utah Council. 4 years ago, the name changed to more correctly reflect our mission, which is citizen diplomacy, to the Utah Council for Citizen Diplomacy. It also helped alleviate misunderstandings when people would call, "Are you the Visitor and Convention Bureau?" Today, as Corey mentioned, we welcome over 300 leaders to Utah each year, and we are supported by thousands of professionals who meet with our delegates to share their time and their professional best practices, their time with our delegates. Our council, what we actually do, you might wonder, now what do they do? We actually make the arrangements, the appointments for our delegates to meet with their professional counterparts. Each program that we receive has carefully crafted program objectives for the areas of study that these particular delegates. For example, I was just speaking with our program coordinator this morning, and she had a very unique task in front of her. She said, "I need to get this representative from China into a pharmaceutical company that gets government funding to see what the auditing practices are to ensure that money is appropriated properly and doesn't leak out into other programs." I said, "Oh, okay, we'll find someone to do that." And so you can see that what this organization does is it taps into the roots of all aspects of our community, and it's a tremendous contribution that our professionals have. Now, the fun part is called home hospitality, and we like to invite our members to have the opportunity to bring our delegates to their home for dinner. And that's all we ask. It's not a lot. We're not asking for homestays. We're not asking them to drive them around, but simply, hey, come over for dinner. And I was recently at a fantastic dinner that was hosted by Martha Ball and Jay Ball. Martha's on our board. And they had the very astute foresight to invite a very strong Democrat and a very strong Republican. And they sat at the table and they demonstrated what an open society is all about to these delegates. And it was really quite amazing. They were sitting there kind of shaking their heads as they were asking questions and hearing the responses from two sides. We don't do this in our country. And it was very, very telling. It was that first-hand kind of experience that lets them see what an open society is all about and democratic principles in action. I've talked a little bit about where they come from, but I'd like to share with you some of these program topics. The Department of State will identify key topics that they feel are highly vital to our world policies and trade issues. For example, right now we're doing a lot of programs focusing on intellectual property rights. We do a lot of programs on good governance. We are one of the State Department's most desirable destinations for programs studying religious tolerance and religious diversity. U.S. educational system, the election process, NGO management, women in economic development, AIDS and HIV management, and free speech in the media. I want to tell you about a group of women that we had recently from many countries. It was an 11-country delegation from the Middle East and Near East. It included women entrepreneurs, and we had the opportunity to arrange a meeting for them at worldstock.com. Are y'all familiar with worldstock.com? It's a great division of overstock.com that focuses on fair trade practices and bringing goods from around the world. They have fantastic stuff, so if you ever need Christmas shopping, go to worldstock.com. But we arranged meetings for these women to meet with the buyers from Worldstock, and there was much exchanging of goods and ideas and thoughts, and they left maybe having formed a relationship, but maybe not. But what it did is it opened the eyes among everyone of what the opportunities are for women around the world. And it was really quite moving to me because I saw women from societies that do not encourage women in business making the stand, taking the challenge, taking the risk to improve their life, to improve the life of their family. And each encounter is a very moving experience. I had a great opportunity recently. Well, it's been almost a year and a half now. Our council is not only a member of the International Visitor Leadership Program, but we're also a member of the World Affairs Councils of America. And this is the country's oldest and largest grassroots organization dedicated to bringing key foreign policy issues to our communities. And they work with governments around the world and private organizations and private foundations to create opportunities for Americans to travel overseas to meet in programs very much like our International Visitor Program. And I had the opportunity to travel to Lebanon. It was a week program, and it gave me the opportunity to see firsthand what our delegates experience. We met with the president, we met with the prime minister, we met with representatives from the UN, we had the opportunity to visit a Palestinian refugee camp, we had the opportunity to meet with representatives from American University. Many of you might remember, oh no, you're all too young, I was going to say. But in your history books you will read that there was a great deal of strife centered around Beirut and Lebanon throughout the 80s. It's a country that's struggling hard and doing a fantastic job at recovering its economy and its independence. And to be able to participate on an exchange program of this nature reignited my passion to a degree that I could never have imagined. If you have the chance to travel on an educational exchange, any kind of exchange, don't even hesitate. Say yes and find the money later if it's going to cost. But you must have that opportunity because it changes the way you view the world. I would love to offer time for questions. We have about 10 minutes left, and actually, before I do, though, I wanted to share with you one thing, and that is, I mentioned my Google Alert, and I love this little feature. It's one of the great aspects of technology. But one of the downsides of technology, of course, is the amount of information that all of us have to sift through. When this program really got going, it was at the height of the Cold War. And what we were dealing with were closed societies that didn't have information access. So we bring the individuals over, and they would see and share it. It's completely the opposite problem now. Now the world is inundated with a lot of information, both good and bad. And how do we as individuals sort that out? Again, the firsthand experience is the most effective experience. But what we look for in these programs is what are the perceptual changes? The Department of State will actually ask our delegates to provide answers to a series of questions, asking what their attitudes and impressions are about various aspects of America and the world and the role we all play in it. And then after it's over, they follow up to say, how have your perceptions changed? But I recently got this Google alert from the Yemen Times. And this was a journalist who had traveled to the United States in 2002 under the program. And I want to just read you two short things. But he quotes, I quote, "I visited the U.S. under this program in 2002 and found it a very excellent study, meeting journalists from different countries and getting to know very closely the media in the U.S. and how it functions. The program is meant for different target groups, including parliamentarians, businessmen, legalists, journalists, teachers, academicians." I think I pronounced that right. "I remember after I came back, one of my colleagues asked me, 'How was your CIA training?'" And I want to address that because a lot of people think, oh, you're bringing them in partnership with the Department of State. Oh, you must have an agenda. And I would like to assure you that our citizen diplomacy and public diplomacy has no agenda. In fact, our U.S. State Department is very, very wise. They know why it's in their best interest to have a private sector partner, because we all operate independently as councils. And I think that's a very important clarification to make sure is met. But this journalist was writing in response to a series of articles that had been written that he felt did not share a balanced view. And I'd like to read later in the article what he said. "I believe part of the dialogue between us and the West is exchanging visits of luminary and intellectual people, including the youngsters. These visits are important in the sense that it enables us to understand the West as it is, not as it is imagined to us, a culture that has no meaning. We have been told that Westerners live the life of animals, being emotionally and spiritually dry. We've studied that we are the best. But when you get to know the Western people, you know how wrong these conceptions are." And I think that's a very, very powerful kind of response, and a very powerful and a very courageous man that has the guts to publish his opinions in his local paper. With that, I have, there are two more things that I wanted to just mention. First of all, if you would like to pursue more information, there are a number of councils and organizations that exist to help promote this. One is called Public Diplomacy Watch, the Public Diplomacy Institute, the Public Diplomacy Council. There's even an organization that's composed of business people that is called the Business for Diplomatic Action. And there is a whole new realm of career available to us called corporate diplomacy officers. So there's another career path to consider. But with that, as you can see, I'm very passionate about this mission. I encourage you all, and I know you all are fantastic ambassadors as you travel and work with people around the world. It's my great pleasure to just be a small part of this whole continuum. But thank you very, very much for having me here today, and I'd be delighted to take any questions.
I want to thank Laura for this wonderful presentation, but I would like to encourage you all to join. We joined International great the experience has been for us.
Oh, thank you so
We've had 6 imams from Kyrgyzstan. We've had a woman from China in charge of religion. We've had 24 men from the Middle East who were in Salt Lake City on the 24th of July, and there were too many people there. They said, we've got to get out of here. So they called and said, can they come down to Provo, and we did.
As you leave BYU and you move to other cities to start your careers, I encourage you to investigate the community that you're living in. There are World Affairs Councils in 88 cities, and there are councils that support International Visitor Program in 90 cities. So I know right now you have your hands full with study, you might live in the dorm, it's not practical, but at some point in your career, we ask you, please be a diplomat, a citizen diplomat, because you are our finest diplomats and ambassadors. Yes.
Laura, how do we sign up?
Oh, thank you very much for asking. I did not bring membership forms today specifically, but I did bring a couple of other things, including my business card, and it is outside on the table when you leave. Please just send me an email, and I'd be delighted to send you the information. Yes, sir.
It sounds like something that I and my family would like to participate, although I find it very interesting, some of your comments that you shared about some of the visits. For example, did you have any concern at all when the family, the Ball family, I believe you mentioned, they brought in a strong Democrat and a strong Republican? I kind of, admittedly, I chuckled when you said that, because I thought, in our state, is that an accurate picture of who we are? I know we we don't have an agenda, but do we sort of have an agenda when we bring these folks out here? I obviously we want to put our best foot forward and give some great examples. But I'm concerned because we love to participate, but we're just an ordinary American family that lives in Provo, Utah.
That's what they want to visit, an ordinary American
The
family.
Ball sounded like a very wealthy family that brought in guests.
Oh, no, not at all. Let me clarify that, because it brings up a good misperception that I've made here. They just invited their neighbors. It just so happened the neighbor on the left was Democratic, the neighbor on the right was Republican, and they just said, hey, come over for dinner. You are the perfect candidate for this program, because we are truly looking for ordinary citizens. Of course, no one here is ordinary, because it takes an extraordinary person to be able to reach out and to be able to offer the kindness and hospitality to someone, to a stranger. But as we say, you welcome a stranger and you send home a friend. And there truly is no agenda. You can invite friends who might share their profession, who might have traveled in their country, who just have no knowledge at all and would like to learn something about where they're from. And all we ask is that you just speak personally from your heart. You tell them what you think. That's all they want to know.
It's also interesting to know that in the responses we've gotten from these people who have visited, both from the state office and from personal letters, many of them have mentioned that their outstanding visit in the United States was in Utah. They love the warmth and the hospitality here.
Thank you. We do hear that so many times. Most people may have heard of the Winter Olympic Games in Salt Lake City, but very few people around the world know Utah is a state. And they get to Washington and they put their hand on their hip and they go, now how come you're sending me to Utah? I want to go to San Francisco. Now that's a happening place. And they get to Utah and they say, oh my gosh, this is the best kept secret. I'd like to stay. And so we as a council have a fantastic reputation with our Washington partners as well as around the world. So we are a warm and welcoming, as we saw through the Olympics, of course. Well, thank you so much. Best of luck with your last week of school, and I wish you all the best in your careers. Thank you for coming.